I think the reason that we have thousands of committed field workers who are actually risking their lives every single day in places like Syria, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Somalia, and elsewhere, is that we see that we're needed to help people in crossfire, the most vulnerable, civilians, women, children, wounded, the elderly, the disabled. They have no other lifeline than humanitarian work. But at the same time, we have to be risk managing what is happening. We cannot be reckless with the lives of our staff. So we are now crying out to the world and saying it is unacceptable that last year 100 of our colleagues were killed, another 100 of our colleagues were wounded, another 90 were kidnapped. This has to stop. More than 4,000 aid workers have been attacked over the last 20 years.
And as you mentioned there, this line of work increasingly under threat, not just in terms of physical security, but also funding. Talk to me a little bit about that challenge and what you think can be implemented to ensure the safety of these volunteers going forward.
Well, we have to do a lot of things to make it as safe as possible for the people who are there in the field so that they can stay and deliver for those who are most at risk. For example, it's very important that we are adhering to humanitarian principles of impartiality, neutrality, and independence. The armed groups must understand that we're not party to any of these fights. We're neither political nor military. We are there to help the civilians, the innocent, those who are not fighting. We do that also through acceptance building, in the sense that we explain what we are achieving, what we are intending to do, and that we're working on both sides of the conflicts. And when we're able to do that, we are less at risk.
You yourself have been very active to assist civilians caught up in the Syrian conflict. Do you think the humanitarian efforts there have been successful?
We have reached millions in Syria. So on one side, I take relief from the fact that the number of Syrians assisted through non-governmental organizations, like the Norwegian Refugee Council, United Nations agencies, and other partners, have gone from 6 million in January to 9 million in June. I just saw the figures. So it's a massive relief operation within Syria. At the same time, we have to admit we're failing too many people in besieged areas that are besieged by either government forces or allied forces or armed opposition groups or the Islamic State fighters. We're failing to reach them as we should. So yes, it's both a success of reaching many and it's a failure in reaching some of the most at risk.
Jan, did you know Sergio de Mello, who this day was named after?
I knew him well, and the 19th of August has a special meaning for me because I took up the job as Emergency Relief Coordinator of the United Nations on that day when a bomb killed Sergio, who were one of my predecessors in that job, but also several staff members of my Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. It was horrific. It was the worst attack on the UN in its history, but also on one of the worst on humanitarian work in general. That is why we have commemorating this day, since in honor of all of humanitarian workers in the whole humanitarian community, but also those who are killed and attacked among those we want to assist.
And lastly, I just want to talk about the fact that, much of the world's attention is focused on the Middle East, but where else in the world are organizations like the Norwegian Refugee Council operating?
Well, we're operating in all of the war zones with great need. And I'm glad you're saying that perhaps too much attention is going to the Middle East at the expense of places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Few understand that it's the Congo that had the largest number of newly displaced people who had to flee from violence in the last 6 months. It's the Congo. There we are pretty much alone in many zones. In a place called Kasai, a region there, we have seen hundreds and hundreds of thousands being displaced. And it's very dangerous because the armed groups, the militias, are really out of control. It is very risky to work in their areas, but we have to do something because so many lives are on the line.